Hello, and welcome to the latest in the series of podcasts from Neurodiversity in Business. This podcast series is entitled ND Voices, so Neurodiverse Voices. And the idea here is that we're really keen to hear from people within the ND community who are making significant change for our community, who are raising awareness, and generally just getting our message out there around neuro-inclusion. And I'm super excited today to welcome a friend of mine, Alex Partridge. And Alex is an amazing neurodiversity advocate. And most of you will know him from LinkedIn and other social media, but also he's the social media founder of the famed Ladbible and UNILAD. And Alex actually was recently diagnosed, and he'll tell his story far more eloquently than I, a few months ago with ADHD. And actually since then, I've been actively following him, and I've also heard from within our community how impactful it's been for successful people like him who have demonstrated a great career in the business space to actually be openly talking on this topic, which Alex, I think you'd agree a few years ago we weren't really there, were we?
No, definitely not. There seems to be a lot of awareness and a lot of voices speaking out on the subject now on a lot of the social media platforms, which is great to see. The stigma has always been there, and I think it's still there a bit, but the tides are noticeably changing. You see it on LinkedIn. The feedback's remarkable. You can really see, you can feel the tides changing towards seeing the positives in a workforce who might be neurodivergent.
Yeah. And that's why I'm really proud of what you're doing, actually, Alex, because it's so important for people like you and me to be setting kind of a role model behaviour and allowing this discourse to happen in the public. So before we get into the kind of the questions, let's kind of let you give an introduction to yourself.
Okay, yeah, hi, Alex Partridge. I guess my claim to fame is I founded UNILAD and LABBible back when I was in university back in 2010. So that was about 5 years growing those two on Facebook and Instagram, sort of working obsessively on my own in my room, to the point where my family and friends were probably a bit concerned about my patterns of behavior, because I was just so sort of plugged into my obsession with growing communities on social media. And I sold Ladbible in 2013. I got and UNILAD I officially exited in 2018, and now I'm kind of an investor, invest in a fair few companies, do a bit of stock market work, and I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD only a couple of months ago, so I'm still sort of on a steep learning curve. I think it's something I've always had my suspicions about. I've always been slightly aware of working in slightly different ways than I suppose what you observe or you would consider to be a normal working behaviour. And then I've just seen so much content on various social media platforms and heard so many people speaking about it that probably was the catalyst for me to seek an assessment. And I had a lovely journey with it, and ADHD came back clear as hell, is what they say. And it was nice. I mean, it gave a lot of context to it. You sort of flash through your working life, and there's so many points where I think ADHD was as an explanation to why I did certain things in various ways. It gives a lot of context to my past, and it's confirmation that I am the way I am, and having that knowledge is really affirming, and not to try and adjust how I work to kind of fit into what maybe might be considered normal, because I have tried to do that in the past, and it's always fallen down catastrophically, and I work best when I sort of just lean into my organic sort of state of working.
Right, and I'm going to kind of probe on a couple of those points, if I may. So in a second, I'm going to ask you about that leaning into, because I've heard that a lot recently. But the first of all is, when was ADHD as a word kind of, when did that come into your vocabulary, and when did you start kind of associating with it pre-diagnosis, I reckon?
Yeah, so I first heard about ADHD probably when I was in school. I had a good friend who had been diagnosed with ADHD. This was 20 years ago. He was in the same school as me, and there was just this awareness that it basically meant that you were going to be an underachiever, you were a problem child, you were a bit of a, reckless, all negative traits, I suppose. And that was the first time I was ever aware of it, and that kind of association between the term and the traits, that was in my mind for a long time.
Right.
I think it wasn't until I noticed the kind of a pattern of behavior within how I worked that I researched it more and realized that there was an explanation to why I did things in certain ways. You get incredibly obsessed and in a positive way and incredibly passionate about a project, and sometimes that passion can drop off a cliff quite quickly.
Right.
But sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it stays, and that's where like amazing things can happen, and I think have happened. I'm having the awareness now of when you think of an idea or you think of a new project and you're a million miles an hour into it and you're often investing money or time, now having that self-awareness of, is this something that does have longevity, or is this kind of a moment of huge excitement that is going to drop off a cliff? And having that awareness means I kind of take a step back now and sleep on it, I suppose, to a certain extent, and see if that interest in it sustains itself.
Got it. And I was interested in your terminology around you leaning into the behaviour, and why that kind of picked my ears up there was that this is one of the narratives of neurodiversity in business, as you know, Alex, is that we're trying to show businesses that actually, number one, you have neurodivergent talent everywhere, 20% of your workforce. But number two is that there's meaningful competitive advantage by you getting right on this topic. So whether it be through properly hiring talent, but also equally and more importantly, how do you support the talent that's in your workforce at the moment? So can you explain to us a little bit more about what you mean by leaning into those characteristics and how that's actually enabled you to be as successful as you are today?
Yeah, so I work best when I'm either on my own or with a very small group of people that I know and trust very well. Me personally, if I'm put in an office or I'm sat at a desk, I get, I would call it like brain paralysis. Like I completely shut down. And I've been in situations like that where I've joined a company. I joined a marketing agency in 2016 up in Manchester, going into the company with these huge credentials to my name. So the expectation was massive, but I'd had no idea that I was walking into a situation where it wasn't suited for how I work. And I was sat at a desk in quite a busy office, music playing all the time, puppies running around the office. And I had to leave within a couple of weeks. And I didn't have the understanding to say to the owner, can I work from home or can I work in a different space? I was getting frustrated because I had no idea why I was sat in front of my Mac on Facebook and just completely unable to think or to do anything productive. So that was like a key example of how I kind of was trying to go against how my brain works. Everything I've ever done has been either on my own in a quiet room, which sounds really depressing, but it's not at all for me. Like that's how I love to be, very isolated and on my own. That's the 5 years I was building UNILAD and LABBible was done very happy, very contently, but it was on my own in a room. I think there's a level of anxiety and social anxiety and that just does paralyze my mind if I'm put in a situation that is not tailored for me to lean into my strengths.
Got it. And I think a really important thing of what you just said there was about how do you get the best out of me? And that's an increasing narrative, right, in the neurodiversity movement, which is in the employment space. Employers should stop asking for diagnoses and deficiencies and deficit. They should be asking it as a generality. How do I, as an employer, get the best out of you, Alex, as an employee? And that could be whether you are neurodivergent or indeed neurotypical, because I think one of the great things that's happened since the COVID lockdowns, and admittedly COVID was terrible for lots of reasons, but actually it's shaken us up, hasn't it, Alex, as a society? And I think these days it's more readily acceptable to say, actually, this is how you're going to get the best out of me. So I'm just interested if you kind of share that belief.
Yeah, I do. It's kind of accelerated a load of companies into realizing that offering reasonable adjustments and allowing people to trust your employees to let you know in what circumstances and what conditions they're going to thrive in. I'm speaking about myself. I again work very well on my own. I would, if I was required to go and work in an office in a group of people and attend meetings and have and be rushed to make decisions and all this kind of stuff, I would hold my hands up and say, you're wasting your money on me. Like, don't hire me if that's what I've got to do, because I'm not going to deliver. I'm not going to be able to deliver. I think people. Do you think people know? Like, a lot of people know what situate how people. Do you think everyone knows how they work best, or do you think everyone's on their own journey of self-discovery?
It's a really good point. It's absolutely a two-way thing, right? Because with organisations now more able to ask those questions, the imperative also on us to, go through that self-analysis and actually, like you've been through your journey and I've been through my journey, is just to be quite upfront and explicit. And that's why your kind of activity, particularly on LinkedIn, where I see most of your content, is great, because what you're saying is, this is how I operate, and there is no deficiency here. This is a strength of mine. And we're going to get into something a little bit controversial, and I think it's something that you and I agree on here, actually, Alex. Tell me about your perspective on this narrative around superpower within neurodiversity. What's your viewpoint?
I think there are some massive strengths to having. I've definitely got some huge strengths, and I attribute them to having ADHD. I think it's unhelpful for people to define various neurodivergent conditions as broadly meaning you 100% have a superpower. Because I think there will be a lot of people who might be autistic or who have ADHD who maybe don't or aren't at this moment experiencing any of those positives, and then they'll compare their probably completely disabling ADHD to someone else's superpower ADHD, and I think that comparison can cause misery. So I don't think it's unhelpful. I think we should shout from the rooftops about the positives, because I think there are many, but I also think they're very individualistic, and it's not helpful to label the entire community as you are a superhero. If you're not flying today, then there's something wrong with you. I think creating that comparison isn't helpful. There are huge challenges. I think we've got to be open about it. You can go through really tough times with ADHD. I certainly have. I wasn't aware of it at the time. Decision paralysis, complete frustration, and almost low self-esteem, because you're capable of doing X, Y, or Z, but you just on that day you just can't get your mind in order to align the things you need to do in order to achieve what you want to achieve and what you're capable of achieving. It can cause great stress and misery, and I've experienced that. But at the same time, I guess it can do the opposite. It can enable you to I think do things that a lot of neurotypical people aren't able to do. But I think everyone has their own personal experience with it. I don't think it's helpful to put a superhero label on the community as a whole.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I think I agree with you there, and that's why I'm pleased that with your high profile as well out there on social media that you talk against that topic. I think just on a kind of personal perspective that we need to always come back to the diversity within neurodiversity, because as you've alluded to, it is so broad a spectrum across topics, conditions, and then within how you as an individual function. I think it's probably immaturity, right? Because it's quite an immature lexicon and language right now, and we're all kind of finding our feet and developing. This is ultimately a social movement, as Judy Singer, who coined the phrase neurodiversity, has said so many times. I want to also just jump back to something you mentioned earlier, Alex, which is that sometimes neurodiversity in business, sometimes we or I get criticised for that term around competitive advantage. And what I'm trying to say is not that there's uniquely a competitive advantage in these types of people, but rather if you do things right by this cohort of people, the 20%, you're a more mature organisation, you are more attuned to your staff's needs, you're more responsive to the broader society. So we're trying to push the narrative that actually it's important to be neuro-inclusive because you will benefit as an organisation, and we're not trying to exclude individuals who are not kind of accessing those benefits within the organisation. So I guess just kind of the reason why I wanted you on here today, Alex, is around that role model piece, right? Because I get contacted by hundreds of people each week, some of them relatively kind of junior in their career, relatively young people, and they're all talking about the challenges they face and the fact that they are disenfranchised from the education system. So I'm particularly keen about putting figures out there like yourselves who have been, really successful in business and have demonstrated what ADHD actually means in day-to-day life. So I'd love you to kind of talk to that audience now and just kind of give them a little bit of a view about this is why you don't need to feel disillusioned. And look, we're in a massively different place than we were 20 years or 10 years ago, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think the sort of stereotype of what ADHD means is massively out of date, but I do think that it is a massive problem, and that's kind of why I'm speaking out on it. I've never medicated for ADHD, and it is actually a route I'm considering, but I think I have my own sort of coping mechanisms. For example, I exercise every morning, and I know that's not necessarily helpful advice because a lot of people might not be able to do that, but my day is noticeably different if I don't go for my 5 run in the morning. Like that's my non-negotiable, and I've always done that for the last 10 years. Well, I have missed a couple of days, and that's why I'm able to know that if I don't go for a 5K run and I get that kind of reward process going early on in the day in my brain, then my day is basically not a write-off, but it's considerably, the outcome of that day is considerably worse than if I when I do go for a run. So that's kind of how I think I've been coping and maximizing the strengths. Because when I come back, I'm able to then sit at my computer for 8-9 hours,
right,
and thrash stuff out, and that's kind of how I've operated over the last 10 years, and it's kind of it's worked really well. But yeah, the medication route is something that I'm thinking about as well, but I need to explore more of that. But yeah, I think people need to lean into the strength, and and you've got to find ways to maximize those and to increase the chances of those strengths sort of showing their face. And because there are many, I didn't use a calendar for the first 5 years of my professional life, and it was chaotic. I relied on my calendar on my iPhone, thinking that that's a calendar, I've used it, what could go wrong, and everything went wrong because that's something that, it's something I have to think about. I have to turn on my phone, I have to click on the calendar app, and I forget to do that. So I missed appointments. I double booked myself. I was doing a huge talk in another country, and I'd also booked a ski trip, and it was just chaotic. And now I have a huge calendar on my desk, and I have multiple calendars, and I have a big calendar on my wall. Things like that, which there's nothing to be ashamed about by thinking, oh, that might be a bit patronizing, or that looks a bit childish to have a big colorful calendar on your wall. But things like that have honestly changed the trajectory of my life. And it's just realizing that my brain works by having huge visual clues and around my flat, and that with me combining with the exercise, I'm just doing everything I can, or I think I can, to kind of push the negatives to one side and let the positives come to center stage. And that's kind of, I think, how been my process for the last 10 years.
Got it. Well, medication on ADHD is a topic that we receive lots of questions about, actually. So if you're happy to, Alex, would love for you to come back in a few months' time, and if you're happy to talk about that kind of journey, wherever it leads you, to medication or otherwise. But for now, I think it's kind of incumbent on me to say how much we've appreciated your time, Alex, and also thank you for your bravery and your honesty, and using your profile out there to actually talk about this topic and expand its reach. And if I divert my attention now to those kind of young schoolgirls and schoolboys sitting there in the classroom, maybe they're hearing ADHD for the first time, those 4 letters, I would say to you, don't focus solely on that deficit and deficiency model. Focus on the fact that actually, as demonstrated very well by Alex, who's been a huge success in business, there are a lot of people in your position. So don't allow yourself to be disenfranchised. Do talk up, and do allow yourself to be the best person that you are able to be. So there's a real note of positivity there, Alex. And thank you for coming onto Neurodiversity in Business's podcast series called Neurodiverse Voices. And we've really appreciated your time today, Alex. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.